Good morning, everyone. We have a big agenda today, so let's get started as soon as we can. Lots of good things to talk about. Welcome, everyone, to the Mesa City Council study session for February the 11th. We'll just jump right into it. The first item on our agenda is to hear a presentation and discuss an update to the Veterans Initiative and Partnerships. Natalie, thank you for doing a great job on this. We're excited to get updated.
Thank you so much, Mayor and members of the City Council. We're really here today. We've been doing, I think, a pretty good job of keeping all of you posted on what we've been doing for this Veterans Program and also with the Chamber of Commerce. But we want to make sure that we're broadening our message and that we're sharing this program and some of the great results that are going on here in Mesa with the community. And so we're trying to take some additional opportunities to do that, and today is one of them. There's also some other guests that'll be joining me in a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and get started, and then we'll introduce them as this goes on. So for Mesa, we have had a VASH program. VASH is Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing Program for the last 5 years. And so we have been housing our veterans along the way. But in last spring, we had a real boost and a focus on this effort through a nationwide challenge that Mayor Giles, you joined on to. And this is something that is happening throughout the country, and it's been going on for several years for many cities across the country. You know, Mesa joined in last spring, and we got started. And the first thing you did is you identified two of your city council members who care very much about this issue, Councilmember Glover and Councilmember Thompson. And they formed a task force. And so what they did is they pulled together all of the different resources that we have in Mesa. And we all came together to start collaborating with each other and sharing information and trying to make things better in Mesa. We had a focus on really identifying all of our homeless veterans in Mesa. We wanted to use a housing first model, which basically means you find the veterans, you put them into a very stable environment and housing, and then what you do is you bring supportive services to them so that you're helping them and you're helping them be successful and to actually stay in that housing. So we worked with all of our partners. We wanted to make sure we were getting the exact right intervention for each of our vets because every one of them has a unique story and need. We wanted to also make sure that we were looking locally through the state and nationally at all of the different resources and the programs that were available, that we were bringing those to the table here in Mesa and really maximizing their effect here. And most importantly, we want to make sure that this is a very sustained and a long-term approach. We don't want this just to be a point in time that we have this focus. We want this program to continue from here forward. So real quickly, a thank you to all of our different partners that we have been working with. We have an abundance of resources in Mesa. We're very fortunate as that in a community. Basically, though, what has happened over time and with all of these different partners, most of them were working kind of in silos, and they were working within their organizations, and they were doing great work, and they're still doing great work within their organizations. But this effort has helped us create some additional efficiencies with one another and effectiveness within the system and the delivery system, and then mostly it's created results for Mesa. So as we've had our voucher program for our veterans, we have housed overall about 138 veterans in Mesa. Just since we started our program and really initiated a little bit more focus and priority here, we housed 70 of them of those 138, 70 of them in 2015, and another 11 just this year so far. So we're continuing to make progress, and as they come into our system, we're working through it in a more efficient way and getting them into housing as much as we can. We have, as I've already talked about, collaborated and created a lot more system definition. We are working regionally to identify all of the homeless in the region and also, trying to really still focus on Mesa in particular. We've created some fundraising activities. You all will participate, many of you, in the Veterans Concert that we had, the Benefits Concert, which was a real success, and we're going to continue that on an annual basis. And we made a lot of connections. I mean, there's lots of stories here that you see. Every time we all get together, there's some kind of a story out there that somebody needs some help. And so we work together to make those connections. I mean, from There was a veteran who had a garage that fell over during a storm, and working with our partners and bringing the VFW and the DAV, which is the Disabled American Veterans, to the table. They had some funds, they had people that had the know-how, and they helped him. We had the church here in Mesa reach out and say that they had humanitarian food that they provide to agencies of need and to people of need. And our community services department took that food along with other donations from the chamber, from the Downtown Mesa Association, put them into packets, and delivered all of this to our veterans that we had just recently housed during the holiday time period. And so we've had a lot of really good partnerships and connections. Even the Mark Center has come forward. They're right there all the time working with us. And during the Veterans Day concert, they had their clients out distributing flyers and letting people know to come on over to the Art Center after the parade. So next, what we're doing is trying to create more awareness for the program and what we've done. We have a focus on Mesa's landlords. We have about 5,000 landlords in Mesa today. Of those, there's probably 500 or 600 of them that are working with us in our voucher program, whether it's the Veterans Program or others. But out of those 500 or 600, there's a little over somewhere between 40 and 50 that are just working with us on our veterans and placing our veterans. So we're going to be doing some outreach and probably calling on the mayor and the council in some respects to help us with letters and letting them know that we need more of our landlords to give our veterans a chance. And, many of them have records and some issues, but what we do with our vouchers is we get them into the housing and then we get them the supported services. So we're trying to minimize the impacts that there could be there and to help them be successful, both the landlords and the veterans themselves. We're moving into what's called an Everyone is a Navigator kind of a program. There's a local agency here that we have also partnered with. They're called the Arizona Coalition for Military Families. And they do a really nice training for people that, Neil Curley and I have gone through it as well. And it teaches you about veterans, and it tells you about the military and the culture that they have and how they think and really the difficulties that they do have when they come from a military experience and transition back to civilian life. And a lot of times they don't want help, or they're afraid to ask help, or they think someone else is more deserving of help. And it's just part of who they are and what they've been trained. And so what we do is we go through this training to identify and understand that, but also to help connect them into the programs and the services that are available. And so we have started going through some of that training. We have the For Our City group, which is, a multiple group of faith-based agencies who are now going to go through this training, because in everyday life, we all reach out and we all experience veterans. And so anytime there's something that there's a veteran and they need help, we want as many people in Mesa to know how to connect them into the resources that are available. And then last but not least, we are creating more of a core team focus, because both Councilmember Thompson and Councilmember Glover made it very clear early on that they want this to be a sustained approach. And so what we've done is we have, 2 or 3 dozen agencies that we're working with, and we've asked Arlen Westling with Paz de Cristo to lead a core team, a smaller team, a more nimble team of us to meet more often, to focus on Mesa and getting more of our veterans in and through our VASH system, while we continue to work regionally, and then on a quarterly basis bring the bigger group together so that we're still having that coordination as well. But at this point, unless there's questions for me, I'd like to go ahead and oh, you have a question?
Yes, please, Mr. Thompson.
Natalie, for folks that are in the audience and for those watching at home, can you talk about the tent that's down on Country Club and why that may not be the best approach to helping our veterans?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Thompson. There is a group of some of them former veterans. They call them Vets on Patrol. Yeah. They've been in different communities, and Mesa is the most recent one. And they seem to have their hearts are in the right place. They want to do some good things for veterans, and they want to help veterans. We have reached out to them to invite them into our table and to collaborate with us, and we haven't gotten any response. Based on what's happened in other communities, at the end of the day, this is just probably not the most appropriate way to provide service. And so, there are things that are going on right now from a code enforcement perspective and possibly a policing perspective, because camping in an urban area and the impacts that it has been problematic for the community. So there is some follow-up that's going on there.
Thank you. Any other questions, Council? I know you've got more folks.
So we have a couple more people that want to
Yes.
speak. I want to go ahead and invite Arlen Westling up, and he has a special guest today, Randy, who I'd like him to go ahead and introduce to all of you. He's going to tell you a bit of his story, and then after that, the Chamber of Commerce is going to give you an update on their efforts.
Great, thank you. Welcome, Arlen. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for Paz de Cristo. It's a great organization in our community.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Natalie, and thank you for inviting us. Paz de Cristo was invited to be a part of the Mayor's Task Force, I think primarily because we're probably the only organization in the East Valley that serves an evening meal. And because of that, we do get a lot of the homeless that come to us. We serve a meal every night at 5:30. We will average, on an average month, about 7,000 visits to our facility at Broadway and Country Club in Paz de Cristo. That's about 2,400 unique individuals, because many people come more than once. And even though people make a lot of visits there, we'll still average over 500 people that are there for the first time every month. So every month we'll get 500 new people at our place in Paz de Cristo. In the last 2 months alone, we had about 2,000 visits from about 202 veterans. So we have a system where we track everyone that comes in. And I think one of the reasons that Natalie asked us to head up this task force is because we do a pretty good job of record keeping everyone that comes in, and every time they come in, we track what they come in and certain information about them. So we've been currently, out of the 202 visitors that have been there in the last couple of months, about 85 of those are homeless. 40 of them have actually signed the medical release. So those 40 are ones that we're currently working with to get into the system. And our job is pretty simple. We have them sign the release, and then we turn them over to the VA or Community Bridges to take it from there. And they do an interview and determine if they're eligible or not. The purpose of being here today, or one of the purposes, is Randy Sweat is with me. Randy came into, has been a homeless veteran for a number of years and has struggled with drug and alcohol problems, and he'll talk a little bit about that. But he came to us, I think, for a shower or maybe to get a meal. We encouraged him to get into the program. Over the past few months, in working with the VA, I hear a lot of criticism about the VA, and we see it on TV. I've actually been fairly critical in certain times. Randy's story made me so proud of the VA and so proud of the positive benefit that he did. We actually hired him a couple of weeks ago as a part-time to help us out on weekends and on early mornings. So I'd just like to turn it over to Randy and let him just tell you a little bit about his story. Again, because it is a very positive story, not only about the Mesa Housing Our Heroes program, but about the VA in general. Randy?
Yes. August of last year, I became homeless again, and I was aware of the HUD VASH program. I had applied for it and got approved years ago, and then I got turned down because the criteria changed. And this last summer, when I became aware that it had opened up and Mesa had a lot of vouchers, I applied, and it took me 2.5 weeks to get my voucher, and then about a month to find a place, which was my responsibility. And I'm assigned to the Southeast Clinic, and I can tell you that mine has been a great experience. I've got a wonderful peer support specialist and a social worker that visits with me every 2 weeks, and she goes out of her way contacting other agencies, and is always bringing me stuff all the time. And, I think where people get messed up is that they this is a different type program than the VA hospital. I've got issues with the VA, because of the crowding, and it takes so long to get in and all. And those are just things that happen. And but the HUD-VASH program is different. My social worker, my peer support specialist, they're calling me. They're on the ball. It's been a wonderful experience. My son likes my social worker. She comes out. She's calls me, and this has been a good thing for me. It's helped me get my custody of my son back. I've got a nice apartment. I've got somebody that calls me every couple of weeks. How you doing, Randy? And she made me aware of the program that I'm working in now with Arlen and them, and it's just changed my life totally. And it's out there, but I think a lot of veterans don't understand that. The stigma that goes with the hospital, and I've had it for a lot of years, is that, this is a different type program, and they're skeptical about getting involved with the VA. But mine has been a really good experience, and can't say enough about it. I like my job. I like where my life is going today, and most of my life with alcohol and drugs has been a hit and miss thing, and it's just been a really quality experience for me this time.
Great. Sir, thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Arlen, thanks again for all you're doing. Council, we're anxious to hear from the chamber, and then we can ask still Natalie some questions before, during, and after the chamber presentation, I'm sure. Chamber, thanks for being here. Thanks for being such an important part of this process.
Good morning, Mayor, Council.
Good morning. I'm going to let Drew do most of the talking here because Drew's been the one that has run our program and has really made a big difference for us.
So I was hoping you'd do a little more introduction for me. Essentially, Sally brought me on board. She recognized what the city was doing with the housing the homeless piece and the inherent interest that the city has in making sure that the veteran population is served. Sally recognized that there's a gap for the rest of the spectrum to kind of be serviced. And so I think that's what she wanted to do, is identify a way to help. And so she brought me on board, and it was fortuitous that she hired a veteran to figure out the rest of this programming and what it would look like. And so to echo something that Natalie had pointed out, there are a multitude of organizations that show up and don't really do a lot of market analysis. Everyone has best intentions, but don't really know what everyone else is doing. So how can we figure out what programs exist out there, and how can we figure out an effective through line and mechanism for us to connect those dots? Oh, we went too far. And so, and that was what I did. So when we started the program, I was trying to figure out exactly what other programs are out there and how we can string all that together. And then how do we also, while we're doing this, how do we develop a program that meets the Chamber's mission and needs? And so how do we service our constituency, whether it's on the industry side of things or whether it's all the way down to the individual? And if there are, and what are the existing federal programs that exist, and how do we localize them? So again, typically what happens is there's, at a federal level, they have these great ideas, and they kind of spread them out across the United States, but at a local level, no one really knows how to implement or exercise these things. And so it takes someone to kind of take this entire pot and hodgepodge and figure out exactly how it's going to work and how it's going to be implemented. And so where we found there was a big need for us, especially that, again, it services our constituency of industry, but also the individuals, that we know that on the employment side of things, especially when veterans are transitioning from service, there are some defined pathways and some that are left to be desired. So you have the GI Bill, and you can go to college and get a baccalaureate and so on and so forth, and you can do direct employment. But the other two that don't really work, that we thought would be very serviceable to us, are apprenticeships and on-the-job training and licensing and credentialing. And so to get into apprenticeships and on-the-job training a little bit, in our state, we have 104 apprenticeship programs, period. Last year, the state of Virginia brought 1,300 online. And so there's an enormous chasm there. And I sought to figure out why. And it turns out the Government Accountability Office did a report on this, and the federal government's horrible at applying these things. So I reached out to the Government Accountability Office and said, can the chamber act as interstitial fluid? Can we figure out what the industry needs are and market that essentially to individuals that are leaving service? And they said, oh, that's a great idea. Would you run a pilot for us and we can write a report about it? So, okay, we can figure this out for you. And so we've had we've had more than 10 different industry partners and defense contractors reach out to us and say, hey, we want to be a part of this. And so as a tool for them, I mean, if you can get a guy in on the apprenticeship or the on-job training, it can cover 75% of their income for the first 6 months they're there, and it tiers down from there to 50% to 25%. I mean, that's an enormous swath and quite an economic incentive to bring these guys on board. And so that's also going to require some partnerships with local schools, community college, EVIT, places like that. So the next piece of it was the license and credentialing. So we all know that when guys leave service, taxpayers have paid for these guys to get technical knowledge and skill sets already. So why can't we take that knowledge that's been embedded into them and translate it into the civilian workforce? And so if we're trying to do that, that requires some additional legwork. It turns out that it's a thought that the state has had. It can't be initiated at a federal level, so what we're going to have to do is bring some partners in on this, and that was something that the Chamber took the lead on in the state. And so we've developed a working group with Department of Economic Services, Department of Veteran Services, Attorney General's Office, Board of Regents, things like that. And so what we've been able to do is really kind of hammer out what this is going to look like, and we'll have legislation for it next year. And it will be a functional through line. So when these guys come on, we'll be able to hand off to the license and accreditation boards. Do these guys meet muster? Do they get a credential of some kind? And if not, how do we connect them to the partners in our constituency and get them a program? And then what's the pathway for them to direct employment after that? And the other piece, the other federal program that is being underutilized is a work opportunity tax credit. And so 75% of these funds are left on the table every single year across the nation because no one knows how to access these effectively. And again, it kind of takes some interstitial fluid. Perhaps the Chamber can do this. And so we've developed a partnership. DES is the administration of this program. And let's figure out, when you hire a veteran, it's up to $10,000 as a tax credit. So there's absolutely no reason why we couldn't figure out how to empty this account every single year by hiring veterans. And so we'll make sure that happens. And then with the rest of our implementation, it's, again, connecting with a new leaf. We've had some success with East Valley Men's Center, which complements the efforts of the city and Natalie with Housing Our Homeless. And I had already discussed the connection that we have with the JTES, EVIT, and the community colleges. And so there's been another chamber that stood up and said they wanted to do this after we have done it in Phoenix. And Councilmember Thompson was able to see what was going on there and feels that what we have come up with would be a functional model for other either cities or chambers to be able to move forward and effectively managing, workforce development tool. And so this picture represents, again, it's that spectrum from industry, being able to help them with the implementation of federal tax credits or programs that exist on a federal level, to individuals. So we discovered that this young man was at East Valley Men's Center, and there was some need. And Sally, doing due diligence and seemingly to know everybody in the city, knew that there was will you tell the story?
Sure. Real quick, we had an opportunity during a meeting, or I did, talking with one of our chamber members who owns a towing and repair company. I asked him when he tows in cars if maybe he couldn't give us a couple here and there for the program. He donated 2 vans. One we gave to the Men's Center so they could transport their veterans and others that are there. Out of 94, I believe there were 13 at that time. This was the day before Thanksgiving. We held a small contest and asked the veterans who were interested in perhaps winning a car if they would write an essay and tell us why they should be the recipient of the car. We had some entries. We worked with Councilmember Thompson and the gentleman who donated the vans and chose this gentleman, Douglas Jackson. He works as an electrician's assistant. He is a single dad who has joint custody. He doesn't get to see his kids that often, but when he does, it's by riding a bike or by taking a bus. He also teaches and coaches youth sports. So we felt that he was very deserving, and it was really a great day when we were able to hand over the keys. It's changed his life, obviously. And we feel like there will be more of this to come. Recently, there was a flag flown over the Capitol from Congressman Salmon to thank this company for their efforts.
And to dovetail that as well, so another success story that we had had a chance to appear on Mesa Now with City Manager Chris Brady. And we had a gentleman call us subsequently the week thereafter and say, hey, I saw you on TV. I would like to figure out how to get into an apprenticeship program. And I said, okay, well, I need to pull some demographics on you. I need a little information. And I said, were you honorably discharged? What kind of service do you have? He said, I did 4 years. I was honorably discharged. Everything went really well. except for I just got out of prison for 9 years. It's like, oh, that makes this a little more challenging. I don't know if that's going to work. Let me find out. I don't know. I've never done this. And so we were able to call, the partners that we have with the apprenticeship program and say, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. Are you willing to work with this guy? They said, yeah, absolutely. We have no qualms to work with him. He needs these 4 pieces of documentation. Get him down here, and we'll get him hired. And so in 4 minutes, I was able to call that guy back and say, hey, take this down there and get hired. Easy as that. So there is a functional way to do all this. It's just somebody has to identify it and manage the process, and I think that's where we stood up to be able to do that. And so moving forward, that's kind of the piece I want to harp on. The city represents one side of the spectrum. We kind of represent another side of the spectrum. It's kind of really developing the rest of that space, making sure that that's really flushed out, and ensuring that there is no gap for this veteran population, and there is a not necessarily wraparound service, but this continuum of care is a good way to describe it. And so making sure that exists at a high level, continuing to expand and develop the partnerships that we have, and making sure that they're strengthened, and then also helping the federal government out by running pilots for them, and then reporting to the Government Accountability Office at the success that we have as a representation of Mesa, Arizona. So that's it in a nutshell.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for all you're doing. Thank you for being a big part of it. The thing I love about this is going forward, this model is kind of shaping up. We've got Arlen and Pause, which is kind of where the rubber hits the road. But then we've also got the business community through the chamber stepping up, so that this is not a government-operated exclusively program. There's certainly a role for us to play, but it's neat to see how the nonprofits and the business community are rallying around this and really being not token members, but doing the heavy lifting on a lot of this stuff. So thank you.
I might add that we've had 2 new businesses join the chamber because they want to be part of the veterans program.
That's great.
So there is an interest out there in the business community.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Council, any questions for these folks? Thank you very much. I do have a couple questions for Natalie, I think. Natalie, remind me, I know we've reached out to some of our neighbors, particularly in the East Valley, and explained to them that the city of Mesa has the ability to facilitate these VASH vouchers, and some of them have joined with us through IGAs. Can you update us on where we're at on that process?
I was wondering if my staff was here. So we have intergovernmental agreements with Maricopa County, Chandler, Gilbert, and Queen Creek, I believe. Oh, here's Liz.
Good morning.
Hi, Liz.
Do you want to go ahead and tell?
Please continue.
And poor Liz has been a little bit ill, as you can tell. She just came in for this presentation. But so we have intergovernmental agreements. And so basically what that means is if we end up with extra VASH vouchers, we can work with these other governmental agencies and bring in their homeless vets as well, and to process them. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about Mesa veterans, it's about veterans in general. And so it becomes a much more regional type of an effort. And we have had some real support from our Congress levels. From Senator McCain, Congressman Salmon, Congresswoman Kristen Sinema. We've had them reaching out and really wanting this to be much more of a regional effort as well. So we're working in that and in partnership with them as well.
I would add that the beauty of the regional approach is that veterans, instead of having to go to each individual housing authority to restart their process with their voucher, by having this regional agreement, it takes away that need for them to do it, and it really eliminates a lot of anxiety. Having to deal with new rules, new processes for every different housing agency. The VA staff really appreciate that as well, because it allows that kind of a seamless ability for them to live wherever they choose to live, which based on their needs, where their medical care is, where their families are. So having that regional agreement has been really important for that purpose.
Great. Thank you. And to me, it makes Mesa not the magnet for all homeless veterans in the East Valley. I mean, not that we're opposed to that, but this allows folks to stay wherever their support group is. If you're a Chandler-based vet, you don't have to move to Mesa in order to take advantage of this program. So that seems like a great model going forward. I know we mentioned earlier that is there a challenge for veterans once they get these vouchers to find landlords that are willing to accept them?
Yes, that is correct. So as we know, the program has some screening criteria that's very low demand because the federal government wanted to make these programs accessible to all homeless veterans. The problem is we have landlords who do have criteria for screening, which we encourage them to do that based on their comfort level and their desire to keep their other residents safe. The problem is it creates a lot of barriers for our homeless veterans to find housing. So one of the things we're trying to do is help landlords understand how they can still screen and ensure the safety of their other residents, but still work within our programs. So those are some of the things that and credit scores and past judgments, and some of those things sometimes can really keep the veterans from finding quality housing. So those are some of the things we're helping them work through, but landlords have their screening criteria, so we're just helping them to identify how they can still work with our programs and still maintain some of those things.
Okay. So if there's potential landlords that are becoming aware of this program through this broadcast or otherwise, they can contact the City of Mesa and we can help them find tenants?
Absolutely. And
okay.
In fact, we would even have some of the VA staff would love to meet with the landlords one-on-one so they can explain the program. One of the things that a lot of our veterans got into some of their difficult situations was because they didn't have any supports in the past. So some of those behaviors or bad credit scores were really can be addressed better because they have the clinical case management at their side. So we're trying to address those and making sure that they don't get to repeat some of those past behaviors that caused them to become homeless in the first place.
Okay, great. I think one of the things I saw at the program going forward is the idea that everyone is a navigator. So yes. Everybody in city government, everybody who's aware of this, if you are aware of a veteran that is challenged, down on their luck, please refer them to us and we can get them the services that they need. So that's a great program. I think Mr. Thompson had something to say, and then we'll go to Mr. Luna.
I did. I wanted to grab Drew before he took off. Because Drew and I have been talking, and Drew, you want to talk a little bit about going forward, what you're wanting to do, what some of the ideas you have are about consolidating and bringing something unique to downtown?
Absolutely. So I'm not sure if you guys are all familiar or had a chance to go, but Veterans Court is an amazing program and process. And so they have a room right next door. And the question became, what do you do in this room? Could we consolidate resources in this room? If you're going to make yourself a regional court and you have all the courts coming here, whether it's Gilbert Monday, Chandler Tuesday, you don't have to do outreach to come and do every single day. Well, there may be some issue with that, unclear. Regardless, the Mark Center has stepped up and said, hey, they'd like to, one, they want to expand, and two, they'd like to figure out, is there a piece of real estate that they can utilize for them to consolidate these resources and what those resources would look like. And when I was talking about next steps for us and flushing out what that middle space looks like, I think that's where the Mark Center fits in that mold in terms of what services they can provide. And so, ideally, it's creating this entire through line from someone gets hit to the city, they can navigate through that process, and then they can get housed. Well, if they have additional services or questions that are needed, that's where the Mark Center can come in and they can provide those additional resources. But the biggest concern, I think, is nowhere in the East Valley, Mesa, or anywhere, nowhere in the East Valley is there a really well-defined space for a veteran that knows, hey, this is close to transportation, whatever it is, I can show up here and I know that I can get the services that I need. There really isn't any one location that's a giant flagpole or beacon to pull these guys in, and so it would be ideal to create something like that. Whether it's public, whether it's private, who knows how it is, but just that should be kind of a thought process going forward.
Thank you. Mr. Luna. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson. Okay, thank you.
Natalie, just a real quick question. So when we open our city website, is there something that says Mesa's commitment to veterans? Is there a button that we can press that gives us all this information?
We have a dedicated website, and I'm not remembering off the top of my head, which is bad timing, but I think it's housingourheroes.org. Okay. So if people go to just the internet and type in housingourheroes.org, they should be able to housingmesasheroes.org. Okay. That's what it is.
Okay. Well, thanks again. Thanks particularly to Mr. Glover and Thompson for leading this effort, and congratulations to everyone on the success. But I think it's important that we realize this is not a one-and-done thing. This is how we do business going forward as a community. So we, as soon as we reach functional zero, the next day there'll be more people showing up at Paz de Cristo that will say yes when Arlen asks if you're a veteran. So it's something that we need to keep going. But thank you to everyone who's done such a great job on this. Next item on our agenda is to hear a presentation and discuss an update on the progress of What Works Cities. Neil, good to have you here.
Good morning.
We're looking forward to hearing more how we're doing on What Works Cities.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. So here I'm here to give you an update on What Works Cities. So Mesa was announced last summer as one of the first 8 cities to participate with What Works Cities, which is funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies, the philanthropic arm of former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg. So with that, What Works Cities aims to work with cities across the country to enhance their use of data and really implement this evidence-based decision-making model. And they do that through the use of several partners, and they make these partners available to the cities that are participating at no cost. So the City of Mesa has been heavily involved with the Government Excellence team over at Johns Hopkins University, Results for America, and the Sunlight Foundation. And a big thank you to them. They have been instrumental and provided some crucial knowledge and background for us to help us as we progress along implementing some of these uses of data and evidence-based decision-making in our community. So together with those partners, we developed this plan of action, which we showed Council last time when we came to you announcing that we would be participating in What Works Cities, and it's really broken down into 2 components that complement each other. That first piece is that performance management component, which is where the Government Excellence team at Johns Hopkins has been instrumental, as well as internally Janet Willem and the Performance Excellence team here have been working diligently to develop a framework in which we can apply kind of these citywide priorities to and use data and evidence to measure and track results. And then that second piece, that open data component, where IT and Diane Gardner, as well as the Sunlight Foundation, have been very crucial, is taking that data and information we're using on that performance management side, and then creating an open data portal to make that available for the public. And a lot of behind-the-scenes work has been done to date behind this. It's not as easy as you would think, just put data out there. So a lot of data preparation has gone on to date. Working with Sunlight Foundation, we've developed a lot of internal policies governing how we release data, ensuring its accuracy, but then also making sure that we're keeping current and that we're releasing that data in periodic intervals, and we're giving up-to-date, fresh data in the future. So with that, in that performance management piece, we also announced to Council last time we would be focusing on these 3 different priorities, and that served kind of as these priorities that we would develop these frameworks around, and that's increasing the prosperity of Mesa residents, transforming neighborhoods, and creating a vibrant downtown. And each of these priorities has a team that's made up of internal folks from the city that represent different departments that all play a role in contributing to the success of these priorities. So go ahead and this is the framework that we developed along with Johns Hopkins and the Government Excellence team that really shows how we will be moving forward and how we'll be measuring results in these priority areas. So you see that first column is a priority. So this is for the increasing prosperity. And that priority really is basically just what we're trying to accomplish. That's stating we're trying to increase the prosperity of Mesa residents. Then we move to the outcomes, and that's how we are defining success. So we have 2 outcomes under that, increasing income and increasing the quality of Mesa's workforce. And then associated with each of those outcomes is a key performance indicator. And that's really the data, the numbers behind it, and how we are measuring and tracking results. And so then these groups got together, developed this framework, and then this is a visual representation of those KPIs for that increasing income outcome. So you have Mesa median household income up on the top, the number of jobs created by the city of Mesa, and then the wage of those jobs created. So this serves to kind of give us a baseline and understand where we're at today and a little bit of the recent trends going forward. And now we are going to start moving into developing some recommendations on how we can increase prosperity and increase the income of Mesa residents. So again, this is just that visual representation of that data for increasing the quality of workforce. We've got on the left there population as a percentage with an associate's degree or higher, and then also tracking the number of students served at Mesa Council on College. And that's just a note there, that's just the past 6 months. So we're waiting to get more data so we get a better trend there. So again, here's that framework again, just applied to that transforming neighborhoods priority. Again, the priority is what we are aiming to accomplish. Those outcomes are how we are defining success, and those key performance indicators are how we are measuring those results. So we put those again graphically. So we've got for the increasing the pride in neighborhoods, this is that outcome. So code compliance, you can see those areas in red are where higher issues of code are, the areas of green. And this is just a snapshot in time. So this is based on data of the first 6 months of 2015. And this is, again, setting that baseline and giving us an indication of where we are at today. We go next to that outcome, looking at the safety of Mesa neighborhoods. You see, again, where we looked at Part 1 and Part 2 crimes and commercial vacancy rates. Obviously, with those areas in red having higher crime rates and vacancy rates. So then lastly, we just took that same framework again. This is for that downtown vibrancy group with those same outcomes and KPIs, and then looking at that data individually, graphically to see where we're at today. Again, setting that baseline, understanding the trends and where we're at today. So we took a look at the population downtown as well as the arts and culture visitors for that increasing kind of that active environment day and night. And then looked at, for that healthy economy outcome, looked at the TPT tax collected for the past few years, as well as you see the bottom left, building permit activity, and then the full cash value of properties in downtown. So these serve as our framework going forward then and really indicate how we will track and measure results. And next steps for these groups, we'll continue to work in prepping that data, and we'll be launching an open data portal in the future with all of this information on there, as well as another great benefit we see from What Works Cities is this peer network, which you see this indicated on this map. In December, they just announced an additional 13 cities would be joining. What Works Cities has a goal to get over 100 cities on board in the next 3 years. So Mesa has access to those peer communities, and they are all implementing this same approach using data and evidence to track and measure their results in their communities so we can learn from some of the processes and policies they put in place, which is what we will be doing in benchmarking and seeing what we are doing now and how that compares to other cities in the future and developing some recommendations going forward. With that, I'll open it up to questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Neil. Let's start with Mr. Kavanaugh.
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation very much. I'm very proud that Mesa is participating in this. And as you probably know, National League of Cities, Mr. Glover is now a board member. This also is one of their priorities, and actually for the advisory council for NLC that I sit on, that's actually the big task for our council to work on in supporting and promoting cities to do this in terms of a data-driven approach to city management and, again, making it accessible. And so you should be very proud of the work that you've done on this. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Luna.
I think this is a great idea. Are you going to go beyond that and survey residents in terms of the definition of what is prosperity and those kind of items?
So yes, that is another component as well that we'll be working with the Government Excellence team at Johns Hopkins. So there is a community engagement piece. Now that we've set that framework as well, we'll be working not only with members of the community, but also other external stakeholders. So for example, on the downtown, working with DMA, NEDCO, see how we can all collaborate and work towards accomplishing those priorities.
So will you be administrating some kind of survey, and will you be taking a qualitative approach as well as you collect your information?
We haven't looked at that to date, but that certainly is an option for us. Those are, again, those KPIs we've developed are to date, but we are open to expanding those, and can look into that.
It's just a better way of triangulating your study,
right?
Where you go from there.
Okay. Thank you, Neil. I know a moment ago you said that part of this process is open data, and that at some point the city is going to, rip the veil off of city government, and all of the people in the city will be able to just log on and know all of our deep, dark secrets and every detail. When is that going to happen? I mean, I think that people are asking this.
We're sometime in the future, so we're working towards that. So again, this is our first kind of our first time putting our toe in the water. So we know it's coming soon. We're working with the data right now to prep it and get it ready. We're not at the point where we're going to be able to give a target date, but we're anticipating within the next 3 to 4 months you should see an open data portal.
But Mayor, there's data here some of it is already available to the community. mean, you can look at crime statistics in your neighborhood. We'll start pushing out code compliance violations that anybody can look at. So we just want to, it's more of a, not we're trying to hold back and filter it and massage it. It's really more kind of just from a, how do we take the data that's in a lot of different forms and systems and put it into a presentation that someone could actually download or look at. And now it's in a lot of our, so co-compliance is in a proprietary system that is collected by, it's collected as staff goes out in the field and makes their reports. So how do you convert that data into something that you could put on the web that someone could look at? So what's nice about this initiative is it really is intended in some ways to be very, well, and purposely to be very collaborative in the sense that recognizing that, one, city government doesn't control or own all the data that's most important in making these determinations. And probably most importantly, we don't have the answers for solving all these solutions. So it's going to take a community effort. So once we're able to not only push the information out, what we're also going to be doing is looking to for other community groups, school districts, and other agencies to also share their information so it's out there and available for the whole community to look at also.
Those are some excellent points. I mean, just dumping data on the community is not necessarily revealing anything about city government. What is more important is having dashboards where you take these key indicators out and you say, okay, here's the things that we're worried about as a community, and here are the indicators that tells us where we're at and where we're going on those issues. And the city is not the font of all information in the community. The school district, come to find out, knows a whole lot more about some parts of our community than we do. So, and they're not necessarily engaged in what works cities. I mean, they're not. So we need to entice them to share a lot of that information so that we can incorporate it into what we're doing so that maybe it makes more sense to all of us. Yeah. Mr. Thompson.
I just had something real quick. Just looking at your overall, at the graphs, or not the graphs, but the city, I guess, the map of the cities. I want to make sure that the key performance indicators aren't skewed when you start looking at the code compliance and commercial vacancy. Because when you look at District 6, the area that's highlighted in red primarily is County Islands. And that's something that we don't have jurisdiction over. So I just want to make sure that the numbers don't get skewed when you start populating those numbers.
Yes, and we take these numbers come from the census, so they don't necessarily filter those out, and we do that. We'll take a look at that further. But then I want to get back to the mayor's point. That is the kind of next steps with the public schools, not just public schools, but other external stakeholders. Yes, bringing them on board and looking at some of the data we can use from them that would indicate and help us track and measure progress. And we actually have engaged with Mesa Public Schools. We had their representative actually in our last meeting working on the increasing prosperity. So we are currently underway, and we'll be bringing in more external stakeholders that have some of that data we would be have benefits to getting access to and sharing with the public in the future.
Okay, great. And so, and we're thinking this is a 3 or 4 months from now type of a goal.
Yeah, well, even the information we just shared with council today, we can push that. We can have that sitting out there available for everyone to look at. I think it's just optimally we'd like to be able to have data. It's not only putting data out there, but it's also keeping it up to date and active so it becomes useful over time. So I think there are definitely some measures that are more easily we can put out there right now, and others will grow over time. So yeah, I think over the next couple of months we could easily do that. And that's what we're getting help with the consulting groups, is showing us how to do that effectively. So
I think in order to show our good faith to the community, having launched this as a goal, it's probably good to roll it out as it becomes available. Sure. You know, we can start with whatever is available now, and then it doesn't need to be a big unveiling of here's all the data, you know, overnight from the city of Mesa.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yes, that is our plan, and we will, as part of the open data portal too, we're going to have a link on there where folks can suggest a data set so we understand all the things we put out. There could be some things missing, so we're looking for that feedback from the community. And still working, again, as Chris mentioned, with the consultants, where a lot of the time, and you mentioned this earlier, Mayor, a lot of the time is really spent more on the metadata, which is kind of the data behind the data. It explains what you're seeing. So really that's where our focus has been in making this data meaningful when we publish it out, so we're not just throwing numbers out there that are confusing people, and we're giving them some context to the data. That's really where a lot of our time has been spent in preparing it.
Great. Mr. Richens.
Councilmember Thompson's comment prompted a thought about county islands and how, they are a part of our community, whether they're in our city limits or not. And so I think gathering data from within those islands is important to understand the populations, because people leave county islands, come into Mesa, people from Mesa go into county islands, and there's a symbiotic relationship that happens there. The one piece of data I think that might be important to consider is how we stack up against peer cities. So, because sometimes comparing just against ourselves doesn't always give us a clear indication. It tells us where we're headed, but how is that benchmarked against people that we're competing against?
Right.
For example, you think of educational attainment and the number of associate's degrees, and our graph shows, hey, it's increased a few percentage points over the last few years. Great, that's a great indicator. But how does that stack up against a city that's our similar size? Trying to think of the census, Fresno, St. Louis,
right.
Whoever it is,
Absolutely.
and in a similar situation, and how could that help us drive what we think we need to innovate on?
Absolutely.
So just kind of another idea that we've thrown. But I really like where we're headed so far. I think it's really helpful. Nice work.
Thank you guys. And Councilmember Richens, Mayor, that is kind of then the purpose of those peer network cities. So we'll be getting a lot of that and sharing data and information with them so we can benchmark and look at how we stack up against some of those other cities that are participating in What Works. So we will be doing that in the future.
Yes, Mr. Luna.
Are you working also with American MCC as relative to higher education attainment? As I look through the graph, I think that's something you're addressing as well, right?
We have not to date, but we'll bring them on board as an external stakeholder. We can do that.
This is great, and these graphs, when you look at them, are very informative. And to me, What Works Cities is a real opportunity for our organization to change, the way we do things. And going forward, at city council meetings, one of the routine things we do is we check the city council dashboard. And we say, well, wait a minute, look, but we have a city goal or priority in the area of education attainment or downtown revitalization or whatever, and we've identified these key indicators. And what we do during this meeting is we look at those key indicators and we say, wait a minute, the trend is not going the way we want it to. Mr. Brady, help us understand what the challenges are here, or what do we need to do to address that, as opposed to just kind of crossing our fingers and hoping that things are going well. I know that's not our current model, but What Works Cities can either be a nice thing that we did, and that's something we put on a shelf, or it can just fundamentally change the way that we operate as an organization. And I think the smart cities are changing that way. So we need to decide what I think these are great indicators. The three goals that we came up with a few months ago, I endorse, and those are still my priorities, and I hope that reflects the council's priorities. But maybe we need to provide some guidance as to, are these key indicators what we want on our dashboard, or are there other things that we think would be more meaningful and help us have a better handle on how we're doing? Maybe that's not something we can answer right now, but I'd encourage us to look at them and see if this is really speaking to us in the way we want it to, or if there's other pieces of information that would be more interesting to us. Mr. Richens.
The only reluctance I have about dashboards and lean boards and all these kind of things is sometimes we get so obsessed with them that those become the thing that we're so busy working on the lean boards and the dashboards and the indicators and seeing all this, gathering all this data, that we forget to focus on the policies and the hard work that actually it's going to take to change them. And so I think they're effective tools. We just have to use them with caution. I see it in the corporation I work for as become a company of lean board creation instead of digging holes in the ground. But anyway, so I just want to throw a bit of caution there. Thanks.
I'm sure there's a healthy balance there somewhere.
I hope so.
Yeah.
We fill our holes back up.
Quite well, in fact.
Well, thank you, Neil. Great presentation. And actually, Council, there is some strategy on our agenda that this presentation leads in nicely to the next item on our agenda. I don't mean to leave it if there's any other questions for What Works Cities. But if there's not, the next item on our agenda is to hear a presentation and discuss the city's current, and provide direction on the existing strategic plan initiatives and future strategic priorities. As we all know, annually, the Mesa City Council has typically had a strategic planning session where we've kind of had a facilitator, and we've talked about our goals and priorities and tried to use that in helping the management of our city. We haven't done that yet this year, and part of the reason for that delay is we talked internally about possibly changing the way we do that, maybe to incorporate some of the ideas that we just talked about from What Works Cities or other ways that we can improve that process. So today this is on our agenda, not to have that meeting where we set our priorities, but I think really just to kind of take the temperature of council and to get some direction from council as to where we want to go in this process going forward. Mr. Brady and I have met with everybody and asked for your input and got a lot of great input on, and a lot of council thought has gone into what your priorities are and what you want to do going forward. So I guess the question is, now what do we do with that? If you don't mind, I'll take just a minute and share my thoughts on it, and then I'm anxious to hear from the rest of the council, so that then we'll chart a course kind of based on the consensus of what council wants to do. I would love to see us, as I indicated a moment ago, kind of embrace this What Works City model, where we, as an organization, get very centered on performance, and we say, and maybe we don't know all the numbers yet, but we identify what areas we want to measure. For example, the document that I shared with folks earlier was to talk about a sustainable economy. And underneath that heading, there's things such as jobs to resident ratio, city revenues, things like that, workforce development. This is where we get into possibly working with the school district to find out what is our dropout rate, what is our disconnected youth rate, what is our early childhood education enrollment rate. Some of those interesting things that I'd like to know more about. Placemaking, public safety. As you know, our public safety folks have really embraced this idea of being data oriented. Our police department has CompStat meetings on a regular basis where they go over the crime statistics and they try to be proactive in anticipating where things are going to happen and where they ought to allocate resources. And the community care vehicle program is a great example of the fire department doing the same thing and realizing that the best way to respond to a medical emergency is not to necessarily send a hook and ladder truck, but it's maybe to send a nurse practitioner. Those are all public safety is doing this, but I'd love to see city council maybe be more engaged in that and have some dashboards so that we're more aware of and supportive of what public safety is doing. Transforming neighborhoods, again, was another topic that I kind of suggested broadly that we might want to have some indicators. So I would suggest that we schedule a time or maybe several meetings. Maybe we break it up into committee meetings where we tackle some of these areas and or others, and flesh them out and say what are the numbers? Are we comfortable that we know what the numbers are, and do we want to establish priorities or goals to change where those numbers are? An alternative to that, or maybe in addition to that, is I think this is an interesting council in that we've got 3 council members that are a year from now not going to be here, possibly 4. And it might be, maybe that means that we ought to focus on some more concrete project type goals. A checklist of things that people on their way out just want to make sure get done. I have no, that might be a good idea. And again, maybe we do that instead of this broader approach, or maybe we do it in addition to this idea of setting strategic priorities as well. So I'll throw that out as an idea. I know there are certainly certain projects that members of this council are very focused on, and that's as it should be. So maybe we recognize that as a council and get less esoteric and get down to, hey, this is all well and good, but I want to make sure this park gets done before I leave, or whatever some of those priorities might be. So anyway, I'm anxious to hear from council where you want to go. I have, like I said, my own thoughts on it, but I'm anxious to follow the consensus of the council. Mr. Kavanaugh.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to provide input earlier on this. I think we should take a combination approach of looking at the big overall priorities that we have and make sure we're on course, or if we want to change course or adjust the course and the priorities. I think that's appropriate for us to do. I very much appreciated hearing feedback from colleagues on the council in terms of issues that are important for them, either that are citywide or district specific, because a lot of times we don't simply have the opportunity to talk about that. And I may not know what the big issues are out in District 6, and this has given me, for me at least, it's a very good education on what people are thinking about and why they are. And so I think that's very helpful as you move into a budget process, to know why people what people are asking us to look at and why. And so I think it's helpful to kind of to try to do both in terms of discussion, because I think we always have to fit the individual items to see where they fall within the overall arching priorities that we'd like to set for our community. And that's something that I've missed in the prior planning sessions.
Okay, thank you. So you would suggest that we, like you say, do a combination of both, where we adopt some city priorities, but also in the meantime, more specifically, I'd like to see A, B, and C accomplished over the next 12 months or whatever. Great. Mr. Luna.
So as I look at this, it looks like you pulled information based on what we recommended, and you've labeled them under sustainable economy, workforce development, and placemaking, because that's what I was going to suggest, that we all share some commonalities as within our own districts, and we all want to improve our districts. Mine's workforce development, and I know a number of my colleagues here have the same priority. So if we do that, and it looks like you've already done that, I think that's a great way of trying to achieve this. But we also have some specific things that we want to discuss, and also educate our colleagues as well as the community in terms of what's happening within our own districts and why that's important for us. So I would recommend, or I would move towards that.
Thank you. And I know Mr. Brady has been very engaged. As you recall, Mr. Brady and I met with everybody, and he's done a good job of the document that you have are his notes related to those conversations. But an idea that occurred to me, Mr. Luna, while you were talking, is maybe what I do is I'm for the purpose of creating something, a jumping off point, I'd be happy to take this document and turn it into a proposed agenda for that meeting, and not suggesting that that's what the final document's going to look like at all, but just so we have something to pick apart and say, well, I like that or I don't like that. And then at the end of either a day, or this might be something that happens over the course of several days or several meetings, or it might be something that we break up into committee meetings. Because I think there's, I'm not satisfied that I know where we're at on a lot of the things that I'm interested in. I don't think city staff has had the opportunity to say, the number for this problem. For example, I think it's great that 2 or 3 years ago, during a strategic planning meeting, the city council adopted a somewhat formal goal of, I think it was 2,500 new housing units in downtown Mesa. I think that's great. I think we ought to have a goal like that, so that we know what we want and how much is too much and how much is not enough. But I'm not convinced that number was based on good data. I think it might have just sounded like a good number. I don't know. I wasn't there at the time. I defer to the people that were. I would love for city staff to go out and talk to the real estate developers and the restaurateurs and ask them, what is it going to take for a healthy downtown? How many more housing units do we need? And do those need to be housing units of a particular variety? Are we going to be able to attract some of the businesses and down here if we just have housing units, period, and 60% of them are tax credit housing projects? I mean, I need to know the answer to that so that I know when people come to city council meetings and they want to build housing projects, I can say, yes, you're exactly what I need, and this type of housing is exactly what I need, or not. So that's just an example of something I would like to see us do. Mr. Thompson.
Well, yeah, and I agree with everything that's been said. I think one of the things that I would hope to see is that we develop a vision for where we want to go. And I think that's something that's kind of been lacking over the last year of, you talk a lot about next Mesa, but how do we get to the next Mesa? And what does it look like when we're there? And I think I'd like to see us all come together with a joint vision of where we want to go and how we're going to get there. And that way we're all on the same page and we're all marching to the same drum.
Mr. Glover.
No, I'd have to concur with Councilmember Thompson. I know that if you look at the documents that were handed out, obviously District 4 had a lot, but it's because I had thought it out before I sat down with Mayor Giles and Chris Brady. And so a lot of my goals are definitely city-oriented because I wanted to say everybody has to deal with blight in their district. Same thing with code compliance. Some of them are more district-specific, but how do we tie that into the vision of where we want to take the city and the direction that we're going to want to go? And I think working with What City Works, then yes, we can do that, but we do definitely need to say, this is our vision, how do we articulate it, and how do we get there?
Thank you. Well, we do have a good start here. I think this document is a good place to start. So if you don't mind, what I'm going to suggest, and then council, let me know if you agree with this, is we'll prepare a kind of a skeleton of going forward a city strategic plan that will suggest specific areas that we want to have base numbers on. I'm going to suggest that all of this going forward is going to be kind of data driven, and it's going to be based on a measurable place that we're at now, and we're going to adopt a measurable place that we want to go so that we can then turn that into a dashboard report that we can periodically see as council members, maybe not periodically, regularly see as council members, and we'll know if we're trending in the right directions or not, and whether we're making progress or we're standing still on the things we want to improve on. Mr. Glover.
I just know that one thing that we probably should do is there is a sense of urgency because we do have 3 colleagues who are turned off, and I know that they want to still have an active role in what goes on in the city of Mesa, and so this has to happen sooner rather than later so that they can have their active voice.
I think we all agree on that. So we're the middle of February right now. Maybe the first, we'll take a couple of weeks to kind of just gear up for this. Shall we plan on sometime, March is horrible. We're between spring training and everything else, but maybe that's what we do is we look at the first week or 2 of March, Mr. Brady, to put on a calendar a strategic planning meeting.
Sure, and
the first week.
Yeah.
So, Mayor, Council, what you're also going to be coming up to, because you'll start receiving your budget presentations in March also. But what I would suggest we do, but it fits in fine. I think one of the things that always helps me as we begin to articulate where we want to go is know where we are, where we're starting from. And so, Mayor, we'll work with you in kind of your define. It sounds like we're trying to create some categories that we can pull a lot of these items together, and I didn't want to do that until the council had a chance to visit. But we can pull those into groupings, and then if we can, and we can just share those with necessarily having this meeting, but just kind of start showing you how we're organizing the groupings of categories, maybe if nothing else, and what we're pulling under there. If we can get to that starting point, then what the staff can do is maybe in the March time, and maybe during a budget presentation, was we can start sharing. Here's where we are today, council, like maybe pick some of the indicators. And you may say, well, I want to know more about this. But I think we want to understand is where we are, and then I'm assuming that once you know that, then you can kind of, and maybe that suggests that you, to me, it's two steps. It's one, understanding really where we are and the data that's available that we can collect, and then you can give us direction on start talking about, is there different kinds of information you're looking for? But then you may ask us, well, what do we want to benchmark against? Because just like the conversation we were having earlier, who do we want to look at as our peer, whatever it is, co-compliance, crime statistics, housing downtown. So I think we want to make sure, let's understand where we are, and then we can maybe break it up into those different categories and have conversations with each one of those, and the council can talk about where is that benchmark that we're looking for, who we want to benchmark. And we can bring back suggestions, but it would be nice to have the council kind of tell us, okay, yes, that's what we want to aspire to look like that. Can we incorporate that? Maybe we can fold those into even the discussions as departments bring their budget presentations in March. We can just kind of fold it into that conversation at the same time. Does that seem reasonable to the council?
That resonates to me. I mean, over the course of the budget hearings, at the end of March, we'll know a whole lot more about the details of where we're currently at as a city, just as a result of going through all the budget discussions.
Right.
So that would be kind of killing two birds with one stone. If we can just kind of in the back of our mind keep thinking, okay, I'm going to remember that number as a key indicator and suggest that that's something that we monitor going forward. So maybe I agree with the urgency idea, but I think maybe we look more towards the end of March after we've gone through the budget process.
Or during the budget process, what I was suggesting too. So it's not.
Right.
It doesn't have to be sequential. It can be more parallel at the same time.
Well, I'll do the document that I suggested and get it out sooner than later. And then during budget, before, during, and after, maybe that'll have some relevance to spur some people to think about goals that we want to set. And then we'll do a more formal process after the budget process. Does that sound like a fair way to represent the consensus of where we're at as a council? I'm seeing some heads nods. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for all of the work that went into getting us to where we're at, and I look forward to. I think this is an interesting year. If we adopt this whole what works philosophy, hopefully this is. We're changing the way city government does things, and it'll be fun to see next year and the year after that it's maybe a little bit easier to move forward on this. Okay, next item on our agenda is to hear a presentation and discuss the city's current organizational and reporting structure. Mr. Brady.
So I think everyone should have a copy of the city's current organizational chart. It's online. It's available for anyone to review. It's a very traditional approach to local government. I think if you were to pull up most major cities, it would look very similar to what you see. We identify the charter positions reporting to the mayor and city council. And then from the city manager's office down, you see the direct reports to the city manager with obviously two assistant city managers who have significant responsibility, significant operational categories or operations throughout the city, have a large areas. They're kind of in somewhat cases grouped together. There's a lot of collaboration that takes place in one area, whether it's development services and the utilities and transportation on one side. On the other side, you see a predominance of public safety and other support services that fall under that. And then we obviously, in between there, we have deputy city managers who have both special projects as well as direct reports of other key departments. And then we have positions that are both functional as well as supervisory, in the chief financial officer and the chief innovation officer. And I don't know what else, Mayor, if there's any other information that the council would like to have.
Thank you. I think this is a good update. Mr. Finter.
Had only one question. Traditionally, they have the public information officer that's a direct report to the city manager. So I see it kind of buried over down in this area. Maybe there's a thought process behind that.
Yeah, it's been a while since the PIO's reported directly to the city manager, although most days I feel like he does. So there's a lot of collaboration. I think a lot of that, there's a lot of event, so public information, in addition to just the media interfacing, there's also, as you know, a lot of event planning, a lot of logistical responsibilities that often are helped to have someone as an assistant city manager, especially with the public safety activities and communications. That's why that responsibility is there. But you're right, it could go in a lot of different directions, but I hope I encourage an open door that almost all these departments can come. But it's a fair point. I try to be sensitive to how many direct reports I get to the city manager because I don't want to become the the clog in the process either, and having one person with too many direct reports coming to me. So, but thank you for asking. It's a good question.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Council, any other questions or feedback on that? Okay, thank you. Next item on this agenda then is information regarding the job order contracting projects. Council, any questions on those? Seeing none. The next is to hear reports on meetings and conferences attended. Hearing none. Mr. Brady, scheduling of meetings and general information.
That's okay. Yes, Mayor, we want to remind everyone that every Saturday evening from 5:30 to 9 p.m., we're still having our Mesa Food Court Festival Forest at Pioneer Park for the food trucks. We invite everybody to come out. We'll be having a pretty strong campaign. We're going to start having a lot more activities that are going to be at the park while the food trucks are there. We're going to have movies in the park. We're going to have a lot of other activities coming up. So there's going to be a strong push through social media and otherwise to share that information. But we have, whether it's 5 people or 500 people, there are food trucks there on Saturday evenings in the Pioneer Park. I always get the question, where are the restaurants in downtown Mesa where everything seems closed up? But on Saturday nights at the park, at Pioneer Park, there's lots of really good food. So we encourage everybody to go to Pioneer Park on Saturday nights. And then just a reminder to the council, our next study session will be February 18th at 7:30 a.m.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. At the State of the City last week, I tried to put out on everybody's table, I didn't personally do it, but there's a great handout from DMA that has the downtown, a little map that shows all the downtown restaurants. And when you look at it, it's really quite impressive, the number of downtown restaurants that we have in downtown Mesa. So the food truck option is great on Saturdays, but it's I think as people look at the current options in downtown Mesa, they'll be surprised at how many good places there are to eat. Okay, next item on this agenda is, unless I hear anything else people want to talk about, a motion to adjourn. Thank you. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. We are adjourned.